and stay ahead with Salam Media. This is Salam Media, coming to you live from South Africa.
The time is just gone 9:33 a.m. on News and Views this morning, and we're now going to take a look at Qatar. And we know on the 4th of January, an agreement was announced which brought to a close one of the worst diplomatic crises in the Gulf region's history. And this was the announcement with regard to lifting of the blockade. And we're joined on the line by Ibrahim Thembisa Fakude, who is a columnist with the Middle East Monitor. Ibrahim, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Thank you for having me.
Well, we know what has happened as far as Qatar is concerned, and with regard to the blockade, we know about the diplomatic crisis that had evolved as a result of this diplomatic battle that had taken place between Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and others, which included the UAE, Bahrain, and Cairo. And just your initial thoughts as far as this blockade is concerned and this agreement that has now been reached.
Well, it's long overdue. Qatar has been looking forward to having the blockade lifted because people have been suffering, particularly those who have relations in Saudi Arabia who had to take longer routes to reach Saudi Arabia to visit their families. So that came quite a welcome change and announcement for Qatar because it needed that. But also, as you know, in Arab culture, people always try very hard to push for reconciliation, particularly within brethren. And Saudis and Qataris are very close. The families are across the borders. So it was important for them that this, and politically, of course, in terms of the region, they needed to have a situation where the blockade was lifted. So it came quite handy for Qatar, and it's going to be easy now for them to move goods and services, and people will move freely, particularly between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, which is the only land border that they have. Previously, the flights Qatar had to take a longer route via the Iranian space to reaching into Qatar. Now they can now use the Saudi airspace once again, which means therefore that flying into Qatar shorter. But we are not told yet what Qatar is compromised, what Qatar gave in, because many people are saying there is absolutely no ways that the blockading nations would have just lifted the blockade without having some sort of concessions from Qatar. So we still need to see what's going to happen. But many people are saying possibly there will be some compromise in terms of how particularly institutions such as Al Jazeera continue to cover Saudi Arabia and in particular Mohammed bin Salman.
Yes. Now, also what is important to understand that this is not only about airspace and about the sea blockade, because there are a number of issues that are at the core of the crisis. Qatar's relationship with Iran, then also looking at its support for groups like Hamas, the whole question surrounding the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, the Muslim Brotherhood actually springs up. So, that is, and you mentioned Al Jazeera as well. So these are a number of issues that are still hanging in balance.
Yes, indeed. And the terms of agreement was not published. And I think they kept it very close to themselves. It was not circulated at all. In fact, I think it was hand-delivered as it was the case before. Fearing the leaks, it was hand-delivered to the Qataris by the Emir of Kuwait. So it's been very closely kind of guarded in terms of what were the terms of agreement. But all the things that the blockading nations said were their grievances which led to the blockade of Qatar in the past have not been noted as having been lifted. We still know, for example, that Hamas is still in Qatar, at least some of the members of Hamas. Qatar has not said that it will sever its ties with Ikhwan Muslimin, particularly the Ikhwan throughout the region and those from Egypt. One of the other conditions was the severing of ties with Iran. We know that Qatar has said it will never do that because Iran was the only country, well, two of the countries with Turkey that came into the rescue of Qatar when the blockade started. But the biggest bone of contention was the shutting down of Al Jazeera, and that hasn't happened. So many people see that as a win for Qatar, because one of the demands, and one of the main demands actually, which led this to be in the media, was the shutting down of Al Jazeera, which was a demand made by Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Egypt. So that didn't happen. Al Jazeera is still up and running, and we haven't had any moves towards shutting Al Jazeera. So that is seen as a win by many people for Qatar.
Yes, and also when one looks at the geopolitics that have been playing out in the region, and particularly when we look at Palestine, which is obviously central to this entire agreement as well, because, how would this actually impact on Palestine and where Palestine is at this point in time? Because we know with countries like Egypt at the time when Mohammed Morsi was in power, there was some relief that was granted to the Palestinians, and we know what has happened since then with regard to Abdel Fattah Sisi, the coup, and how this actually impacted on Palestinians, but also generally looking at the Muslim Brotherhood in the wider region. We've heard about what has taken place in Saudi Arabia not very long ago, where close to 100 scholars were actually imprisoned for not condemning the Muslim Brotherhood and calling them a terrorist organization.
Well, I think the issue of Palestine will be resuscitated, yes, but we need to remember that there are a lot of moves towards the normalization of relations with Israel, and that disadvantages Qatar. United Arab Emirates and Bahrain have gone ahead to normalize relations, and speculations are that Saudi Arabia, in the absence of King Salman, who has been the only one, at least for now, within the current executive of Saudi, who has been against the normalization of relations with Israel. It looks as if, given the business of Jared Kushner, at least for now, at least before the Biden regime comes in, has been very close with Mohammed bin Salman, and they were also planning on normalizing relations. So if that happens, that will be very bad for the Palestinian cause. But I have a different view to what's been going on. I think the normalization of, or the removal of the blockade by mainly Saudi Arabia, which has been pushing for this, has actually thrown both Bahrain and United Arab Emirates under the bus, because Saudi Arabia is seen now as pushing an intra-reconciliation process, in other words, reconciling with its own brother and reconciling with a fellow Muslim country, while the two, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, have gone on to normalize relations with an actual enemy, in inverted commas, which is Israel, instead of first sorting out the problem with Qatar. So I think what Mohammed bin Salman did is this time around gaining some sort of mileage, at least in terms of public relations within the Arab world, because he's seen as someone who's interested in reconciling with his own brothers instead of prioritizing Israel. So it has further alienated Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, and it has brought closer Mohammed bin Salman towards the region and the broader Arab world. So he played politics with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, because he is seen as pushing an agenda. And you must remember, if he's reconciling with Qatar, many people are seeing, therefore, that he's likely to resist the temptation of normalizing relations with the state of Israel.
But also, Ibrahim, the other player here is Turkey, because we know what had happened since the blockade and the support that Turkey had provided Qatar with as well. And this also raises a further question as to, we know, as you mentioned, we don't know the details of this agreement yet, but Turkey, a key player and featuring very, very prominently as far as the blockade was concerned, and I'm sure there are some considerations as far as Turkey is concerned.
Well, I think what they're hoping to do is that Qatar will certainly come handy to the GCC, because it is likely to bring Turkey into the fold. So that's very important, because one of the only country within the GCC that had a very, very strong relations with Turkey is Qatar, and we are likely to see the GCC using the Emir of Qatar, Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, in towards making sure that at least they improve relations with Turkey. That's one. Number two is he's also now a new go between Saudi Arabia or the GCC and Iran, and I'm sure that the GCC needed for a very long time a person within the bloc who could speak to Iran. And I think what's going to happen now, it's going to be easy now for the GCC to speak to Iran, whether openly or behind the scene, because Qatar has established that relationship. So Qatar has got a much more stronger position now, because it's got two very important players within the region. One is Iran and the other one is Turkey. And if the other members of the GCC want to extend invitations to discussions or further their political objectives in any way in the region, the only country that can do that effectively, it will be Qatar. So bringing back Qatar and resuscitating the GCC, you'll see that Qatar is most likely now to play a much more stronger diplomatic role within the GCC, particularly in trying to breach the relations between Iran, Turkey, and the GCC. Finally, I think with Biden coming in, and Biden has been anti-Saudi for obvious reasons. One has been that Saudi has continued to violate basic human rights and the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. So he has had a position in that regard. And also Biden has also said that he's going to revive the joint comprehensive plan of action that existed between Iran and the Europeans and Americans before. That means, therefore, that Iran is likely to take a spotlight in the Biden regime. And for the GCC to also have a place in this negotiation, which is going to be resuscitated by Biden, you need Qatar to convince the Americans that it's wise to involve the GCC, because Qatar is the only country right now that could or can be trusted, given the close relationship that the Trump regime, particularly Jared Kushner, had with the others. I mean, Trump had a very close relationship with UAE, had a very close relationship with Saudi Arabia, which are the two main players in the region. And the only one that was isolated and trusted all along, at least by the leftists in terms of politics of Trump, has been Qatar.
Well, Ibrahim, very, very interesting in terms of the analysis, but let's wait and see what the details of this agreement actually say. But for now, as always, we thank you. We say Jazakallah to you for your time with us here on Salam Media on News and Views. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Ibrahim Thembisa Fakude joining us this morning on the Qatar blockade, and very interesting developments that are taking place. And yes, it's a question of wait and see as we get a lot more details on this agreement that has been reached with Qatar. The time is just gone 9:46 a.m. We come back, we'll be joined by Mola.